¿Qué tal, comunidad? Aquí habla su abogado Ray Ybarra Maldonado with today's edition of What on Earth Did Our President Do Today to Go After Immigrants? And in our version of November 9th, 2018, we have a new assignment. We have a new regulation. We have a new opinion, proclamation from the president. So if you're interested in learning about what President Trump said today about asylum law, do me a favor, give me a like, give me a share so that other folks can know to tune in to get the update about what President Trump did on asylum law today, how it affects the caravan, quote unquote caravan coming up, and other people seeking immigration, how it affects those already in the process of applying for asylum law. So we're going to go over two documents today. The first one being the actual proclamation, which the president issued. And we'll go over that. Let me get it up here for you. And this came today from President Trump. Presidential proclamation addressing the mass migration through the southern border of the United States. What do you have to know here? Let's take a look at the first few lines. United States expects the arrival at the border between U.S. and Mexico of a substantial number of aliens, primarily from Central America, who, they get this sentence, the rest of it here, who appear to have no lawful basis for admission into our country. Apparently, President Trump has already adjudicated the asylum claims of every single person coming back up from Central America to Mexico. Apparently, they've looked into it already. No need to keep coming and tell your story because Trump's already decided that you appear to have no lawful basis for admission into the country. And that's kind of what you need to know. The premise of this proclamation starts with that. We think nobody has the right to come into our country. They are traveling in large organized groups and reportedly intend to enter the United States unlawfully or without proper documentation and to seek asylum. Another glorious prediction from the Trump administration that these folks don't intend to come to the port of entry. They intend to enter unlawfully without proper documentation to seek asylum. How do they know? They haven't adjudicated the claims. They haven't talked to people. They don't know how they're going to come into the country. They are simply saying in the first two sentences already inaccurate statements that are not based on fact, but are based on what they wish to be the truth. Okay. Now, what does it mean? We got here a lot of mumbo jumbo about the skewing of the numbers, about who can come in, who hasn't come in, about his ability to stop and to not stop. And I'll give you the nuts and bolts. Sorry, I'm scrolling so fast. I'll put the link down below. Now, therefore, this is what I'm going to do. Donald I. Trump. And this first one, it reads, I had to read it like 4 times, try to figure out what it means because it seems so harshly worded. The entry of any alien into the U.S. across the international boundary, I hate using the word alien, I apologize, between the U.S. and Mexico is hereby suspended and limited, subject to Section 2. That suspension limitation shall expire 90 days after the date of this proclamation. So he's essentially saying I'm suspending immigration for 90 days as I'm going to tell you about it right now. So anybody who wants to come to the port of entry on a visitor visa, down here if you have a lawful permanent resident card, anyone who presents at the port of entry, you're fine. No game changed. Still come across your border crossing card, your visa, permanent resident card, citizenship. You can come back and forth across the port of entry. Don't freak out. No reason to stress out about it whatsoever. What they're saying here is essentially this. For the next 90 days, they are not letting anybody who enters the country other than at a port of entry be allowed to apply for asylum. Now, it's a huge deal because oftentimes people who are coming up from Central America, they're told just to cross the border, look for a Border Patrol agent, and tell their story about why they're afraid to go back. The reason being is the port of entries are not letting people in to take their asylum claims. So isn't this a beautiful thing that the Trump administration is doing? Saying you must come to the port of entry and apply for asylum. At the same time, they're not letting people come into the port of entry and apply for asylum. So the rhetoric that goes out to the nation is these people got to get in line and do it right. But the reality of what's happening at the port of entry in the line to do it right is they're not letting people in. So my wife and I were down there a couple months ago in Nogales, and we saw firsthand there's organizations that keep a list of people who want to apply for asylum, NGOs in Mexico, communicate with Customs and Border Protection, and they will take in a certain amount of people to process their asylum claims. Those people first must sleep outside of the port of entry on the sidewalk, not told exactly what time they're going to be let in to be processed, must just sleep there, sometimes for days, and wait to be called in. Those who aren't lucky enough to have their numbers come up next must stay at the migrant shelters somewhere in the city until their number gets closer to being called. And you could wait for weeks, you could wait for longer, and you get tired and decide just to go across the border, find the Border Patrol agent and tell them, I'm afraid to go back to my country of origin, which will then kick off the process. So what President Trump is doing to get around that is saying for the next 90 days, anyone who doesn't wait in line and arbitrarily will decide when we decide to let who in and how many, and instead crosses the border without inspection, that is jumping the fence, that's going through the desert, that's going through the mountains, crossing the river, whatever have you, and then ask for asylum, will not be able to apply for asylum. They'll be able to apply for something that's called Convention Against Torture or withholding of removal. To be able to apply for those two things, they'll have to pass a higher standard of a test, which is called reasonable fear. Right now, someone has to show reasonable fear if they've already been deported, came back, and are caught and are about to be deported again. Reinstatement of removal, it's called. They then have to pass the higher standard, which is harder to win, higher standard of reasonable fear. Whereas yesterday, if someone came across the border other than a port of entry, again, desert, mountains, river, whatever it be, you had to pass a credible fear interview, which is the same interview you have to pass if you go to the port of entry. Credible fear is easier to win. It is. It's the legal standard. It's a lower standard, lower threshold. It's easier to win. It lets you be on the path to apply for asylum. Trump is intentionally making it harder for people to apply for asylum. The spin is good from the Trump administration because they're saying, we're not taking away asylum. We're just saying you have to go to the port of entry. But the reality on the ground of how it's playing out is you go to the port of entry and you're told not going to happen. And you're forced to wait for weeks on end without having a clue of when your name's going to be called. If you're lucky enough to be able to identify this group that has a secret list and talk to them and have them let you into their shelters, right? Anyone else who decides to just cross over for the next 90 days, they're not going to be able to apply for asylum. Have to pass the harder standard of reasonable fear to get to the Convention Against Torture or withholding of removal, neither of which are paths to permanent residency or U.S. citizenship and can be revoked essentially at any time. So it kicks you out of asylum, which is the process to get granted a work status, then residency, then citizenship perhaps. So completely takes that out of the game for those individuals not coming across to the port of entry. How does it apply to cases that are already in the country? People who already passed credible fear, people who are already reunited with their kids? Not at all. It is not retroactive. It doesn't go back in time to affect anybody's cases. It affects anybody from today, November 9th, for 90 more days. And then in the 90-day mark, the president asked in this proclamation for DHS to get back to him to see if additional time is needed. What is going to happen? ACLU and other folks already talk about suing, bringing forth a lawsuit saying that Trump is essentially engaging in creating laws as opposed to being the executive. So we'll expect to see that in the next couple of weeks, a lawsuit challenging this new policy from the United States government. Now, to get this back up here again, here's where we had the section that talks about what they're going to do, and they can still apply for Convention Against Torture, and it's good for 90 days, and they'll go back to them. It also says that they are going to, where it is, it's Secretary of State, Homeland Security, shall consult with the government in Mexico regarding appropriate steps consistent with applicable law and foreign policy to address the approach of large group of aliens traveling through Mexico with the intent to deter, dissuade, and return them before they even get to the border. Interdiction, Section 3. They kind of could be read, I mean, it says consult with Mexico, consistent with the applicable law and foreign policy, but it kind of reads as Trump saying, we need to get into Mexico and turn them around. We need to go into a sovereign nation and control what's happening domestically within that nation. It's a little scary. A little scary when we're talking about our neighbors to the south there. Glad that there's qualifiers about consult with and within law and foreign policy consistent with that, but very nervous that it would even get to the point where Trump is saying essentially we got to go into Mexico and stop these folks before they get to the border. So that's a little nerve-wracking. And when you want to see what the justification is, it's the fact sheet from the White House where they talk about Section 212F here of the INA. Whenever the president finds that the entry of, I'll call it persons, it says the other word there, would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may by proclamation, and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of any aliens any restrictions he may deem appropriate. So this is the statute that they're pointing to, saying that Trump actually has legal authority. And again, he has to show it would be detrimental to the interests of the United States. And that's the part where I vehemently disagree. There is no showing of a detrimental interest to the United States to have a few people, a few thousands of people, yes, thousands, if that's where they're at right now, come across our country to seek refuge, to apply for asylum. This is not something of akin to what we're seeing across the country of people going into bars, of people going to other events and shooting up with high-powered assault rifles. That's detrimental to the interest of our country. People are coming across to make a better life for themselves, to fear, to flee from fear, from persecution, not so much detrimental to the interest. Now, if you believe in white nationalism and if you think there's too many brown people coming across the country, I can see your argument. Hey, it's detrimental to have more brown people because we want a white nation. And perhaps that's what Trump is saying. I certainly believe that's what he's saying, because he's not addressing here the mass shootings that we have going on across the country from white folks. He's addressing these poor folks who are coming across to provide a better life for themselves and their kids, as that being detrimental to the interests of the United States. I think that's ridiculous. So thanks, folks, for tuning in. I hope that clarified a little bit. Yes, my pleasure to share the information. Just wanted to get that out there. So I saw a lot of people posting about it, about what it means, what can we do to challenge it, what can we do to fight it. It's going to happen. We're going to fight it tooth and nail. There's no way that individuals who are coming across our borders should not be allowed to apply for asylum. And there's no way Trump should be able to de facto stop them by saying, come to get in line, and not letting anybody into that line. So that's what we've seen so far. I want to thank again everybody for tuning in. Any questions you have, thanks so much. And drop them down below. We'll get back to you. If you don't want to put it public, send me a message. Or remember, share and like, because that way people can learn. I've read some articles. What I do first is I look for the main text of whatever it is the announcement is. So I read the president's proclamation. I read the president's fact sheet. Then I go read what the newspapers and everybody else saying about it. I look if any experts have opined on it already. And then I come and say, okay, I know enough to give you my opinion to inform you about what's going on. And all the newspaper articles I was reading, they weren't even close. Like, guys, what are you talking about? That's not what it says at all. This is what it says, based on my experience. As we're here in Arizona, we do a lot of reasonable fear, credible fear, asylum cases. So we know this area of the law very well here at the office. I'm confident what we're saying today. Of course, if you do disagree with me, feel free to drop that down below as well. but that is our interpretation, and make sure you can share it so people are accurately informed so they can accurately advocate. Because the first step to creating change is educating yourself to the problem, being able to articulate what the solution is to that problem. Here we have it right here. Trump is creating laws on his own to prohibit people from applying for asylum, and that should not happen. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope I don't have to see you again this week, another live, something else horrible happens with immigration, and look forward to talking to you next week. Thanks so much. Bye.